Welcome to the Wing Life Podcast, where we talk about wingfoiling and the lifestyles of those who enjoy this great sport.
You know what? Thinking of commentating, it's always, are we ready to rumble that comes to mind. So I think since GKA and GWA, I think we got to get that to start it off. So we got to do it. You want to take the throne? You got it. Yeah.
Are we ready to rumble?
There you go. You got it. So you've had a long history in wind sports. It's pretty cool, actually. We looked into you a little bit, obviously doing a bit of research, and at the early onset of GKA, how has that journey been through Kite and then also Wing as this brand new? It must have been a pretty cool time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're very fortunate people who can say we dedicate ourselves to our passion and to be able to consider it a job. I was fortunate enough to be in the GKA from when it was founded, which was just 10 years ago. And then obviously as the sister tour of the GWA came on, starting from the same beginnings and being involved in that core team to see how another new water sport evolves, and being one of the fastest growing water sports in the history of that water sports. I think it's, very precious, very cool, very, very good moments to be involved, because, obviously the core team has a lot of experience from different disciplines. You have, judges who have competed back in the days. We have, guys coming from windsurfing, guys coming from kiting, snowboarding, racing, kind of coming underneath one roof to try and push and progress something new like wingfoiling is, which, we can, I think, what we would be at about 5 to 6 years when it really started to take off, even though, probably a decade ago, we started seeing people playing around with what used to look like wings. I remember being on Taco Lake in Thailand with Sven and the guys from Starboards, and with Airush starting to play around with being on a paddleboard with what semi looked like a wing today. And yeah, really, I think it's a very, very cool moment of the sport, and sky is the limit, and definitely the guys and the girls, the athletes are taking it there.
Yeah. And how did you get started in this whole, did you grew up in Tarifa?
Yeah, I was born in the UK in Newquay, which is kind of a surfer town of the south coast of England. And I moved to Tarifa when I was 5 because my family comes from a water sports background. My dad was a shaper and was actually ran Cobra for many, many years, where they do all the big manufacturing production for boards. So I've always had let's say the industry has always been in the house. And then obviously living in Tarifa, since then we arrived 92, 93. And, with the Red Bull Skyride back in the day of like 99, 2000, fortunate enough to be able to get my hands on the kite very early on with the likes of Eduardo Bellini, Jaime Arias and the boys. Started kiting, and it was a lot easier back then for sure. And yeah, was able to be fortunate enough to compete, and competed on the PKA World Tour of kiting for many years. And then when the athlete side started to tilt it down, getting involved in sales, and then the GK came along when the other tours faded out, and was, met Jorgen, met Jaime, who was the sports director, Jorgen, obviously the CEO and still the CEO today, and with a core group of people, which are still involved to this day, we started putting together what is today the Qatar Airways GK Kite World Tour.
Okay, wow. Now, what brands were you working with for sales and stuff after you were working as an athlete? And
I was sponsored by Airush and the Taco Group. So then I did the Spanish distribution for Starboards Airush Severn. So obviously when I stopped competing, started doing the memos, I'm very involved in the R&D of the Razor back in the day. So fortunate to travel around, and boards as well because of the background of my father with Cobra. So always started to do that. I like competing, but I was either very good or very bad, depending on the day. But I was always a good talker. So I guess that's where we are today.
Did you enjoy like competing more? Do you enjoy your role that you're doing now more? Just because of the interactions and the fun conversations you can have with so many people. Which do you prefer the most?
I think I was never a big fan of competing. I think to be a good competitor, you have to have that pit bull mentality. You have to have that focus, and that be your only goal. And as much as we would love our sports to not be niche, they are very niche sports. And to be able to make a full living just on competing is a very, very hard feat. And I saw that early on, and knew to be honest with myself and with my sponsors, that I was not going to be that podium athlete, and started to look for other avenues. And I've always loved to travel. I've had traveling in my family since the beginning, and I saw kiting as my opportunity to see the world. And if it lasted 1 year, or I think it's almost 22 years now, well, awesome. And being able to, try and be, you see so many riders that they forget they have to be ambassadors of the sport. There's always going to be a kid that spins faster than you, jumps higher than you, and depending on the day of competition, will be able to beat you. But if you can be that complete package, you are going to last long. I mean, if we look at the industry, a lot of the higher people up in our industry are ex-riders, ex-competition people, ex-organizers, and it's I saw that avenue, pursued it, and fortunate enough to still be here today.
Yeah, I guess you don't necessarily need to be a top level athlete, but it's the passion, dedication, and time that you put in overall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, growing up around Cobra, like that's one of the main factories. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, my dad he's been in shape all his life, and we moved to Tarifa as they were running the No Work Team studio. Which was windsurfing days before kiting. And then he moved to the Canaries, where he was one of the shapers for Proof, which is the brand of Beyond Dunkerbeck from windsurfing.
Oh, okay.
And from there, they moved to Cobra, where he ran the kite department for probably the best part of 10 years, together with Bruce, who's the guy who still runs windsurfing department today. So obviously, board manufacturing has been in my family from the beginning. I had my cradle was in my parents' windsurfing and surfboard shop in the UK, in between the boards. So I've had resin in the vein since day one.
That's a pretty special upbringing to not only like fall in love with the sport that's in your family, because there's some people who it's not in them, right?
Yeah.
How does it feel to share that same passion with your parents and whole family?
As super fortunate, to be able to, the best memories I have of my water sports is, waking up at 6 a.m., going for a surf with my dad out of the break, and just being the two of us, very fortunate to be able to share that passion. And he was always the manufacturing side, which I wasn't a fan. I was more the commercial and other sides of the business. And yeah, obviously, all of my uncles, my parents, they were very involved, and being very fortunate to be able to be that close to the industry. Cobra, for example, to have been able to see the factory from the inside, which is very lucky to see how the whole manufacturing process of what is going from a blank to a boards before the days of CNCs and a lot of the automated things that we have today, actually meeting people that can take a blank of foam and turn it into a board without a computer. I think it's very fortunate.
Pushing passion. There could be a lot of other things you could be pushing, and it's cool that there are people who dedicate their lives to sports that help bring the world in a place that we'd like to go.
Absolutely.
I know. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
And they share that passion, and you can see that with people. It's not about the numbers, it's not about the units or where it's going. Is there that tribal let's say, what a lot of us could understand from the surfing side is those veterans, that family feel. It's awesome.
Especially shapers, like we've had a bunch of fairly big name shapers on, and it's, yeah, it is their art form, it's their work, and then looking at the amount of time and dedication and the finesse that they've put in their craft over the years, just to allow us to like turn a little sharper or do this or do that, right? Like, it's crazy to think of all the stuff that goes into that.
Yeah, and the differences that millimeters make, which I think a lot of the times people don't realize, and the amount of time being involved in R&D that, we see a lot of the top brands these days, and like, you'd be making 100 prototypes of one model to try and improve it. It's there's a lot behind it to be able to get that, I like to call the USB plug and play, that the end consumer can just grab it, go in the water and go, that was awesome. that there's a lot of work behind that.
No, fair enough. So back to your kind of commentating, how, obviously, since we're more wing focused, whatever, GWA, that thing has absolutely exploded. Let's go into a little bit of that journey of going through that whole process of start, because I know your first ever tour stop was in Brazil, and then from there it just expanded more and more tour stops every year.
Yeah, I mean, the Superfoil back in the day was, when Wingfoil started to come onto the map, it really came with speed. Like, you could see that this had traction. Obviously, it had the industry was behind it. There was, a lot easy access for a lot of locations. For example, in the European market, where there's lakes, where the wind is in the middle of the lake, and they could just paddle out and then go and have a session. The safety side of it, that you can let go and it stops. I think it was just to see that traction, and then. One of the best things that happens today is the youngsters. There was so many new generation young kids starting to wing in the first year that winging came into the picture, and that just meant future. I think one of the things we see in kiting is there's not a lot of kids. Of course, there still are kids and very talented kids, but you go to a wing event now, you go to the GWA. And they are 14 to 18 years old. And there's from 14 below, which is they can't compete yet because you have to be over 14 to be able to compete unless you have a wild card. There's so many. And that's so cool, because with the kids, it means there's the parents. With the parents, it means there's the whole circle kind of starts to close itself. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Year to year, event to event even. It's just insane how many changes there's been. It's really cool to see.
And moves like off the charts. Did you guys foresee that?
I have to study literally so much for these youngsters. These kids are killing me. Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But it's like any, take the likes of snowboarding back in the days. It got to a point where it was, half pipe was 10, 10, 10, 10 and spin to win. And I guess you have to touch the roof for it to come down. I'm always a big fan of quality over quantity. Give me a big front roll with power high, and don't give me a triple whirly gig to tornado spinner jig. I love that quality style, but you do have to go through that process to come down. We've seen it in so many sports, and I think this end of the season, like what we saw at some of the last events, and what we can see coming is also it's the athletes, for example, Chris McDonald, Xavi Core, Noé Kuyala, Axel Gerard, Malo. These guys are pushing. You take Nia, you take a lot of the girls that are going so big that also their body weight is something that is starting to hold them back. Because we saw it, for example, in kiting. For example, the likes of Alex Pastor, who was multiple-time world champion, and it wasn't until he suddenly grew and got muscle that the next level came. And you see the likes of like Malo, Neuer is, what is he, 160, 165 tall, probably 55, 60 kilos. You wait until these boys are 70, and you wait until these girls, with the equipment development as well, which is always a difference. It's going to be ridiculous because they're out to lunch. Like, they are pushing so hard that it's really cool to see. It really is.
What, if any, because there's been a lot, what would, let's say, your favorite move that you've seen so far or thing that wowed you the most?
Tituan's double front in Maui, without a doubt.
Double front.
Excuse me, double back. I apologize.
Double back.
His double back.
Yeah.
I've seen double front attempts from Axel.
Yeah.
But just kind of like the double backflip in motorcycling from Pastana back in the day. It was like just those moves that really lay down. And freestyle competition is a different animal than free riding in any sport. Mm-hmm. And it's the attention to detail, because in the end, in a competition, you play to the judges.
Yep.
And you don't have all the time to perfect it. And that's why there's great competition riders, there's great free ride riders. There's unusual that the same person is good at both. Mm-hmm. And I think, stuff like that. And then all of these tack frontside sevens and stuff like that, actually tacking in front of the wave, using the wave as a kicker, and then rolling out is unbelievable.
I'm just looking to hear Frank had a few questions for us too. Mm-hmm. Following kite surf yourself. Oh yeah. Well, you competed on the tour, so he was more curious about finding a little bit more about how your first experience was with Wingfoil itself. Like, how was your first foil?
I was impressed on how hard it was. Mm-hmm. I went into it going, this is going to be a piece of cake. We've been doing water sports for ages. Got up on that board and wow, humbling in the way of that, how the right teacher, right gear makes such a difference. And especially, these initial stages that a lot of us who start wingfoiling come from other sports, and we forget that, hey, there is a reason there's schools. There's a reason these schools have the right equipment, because what the average person is using won't allow you to get up and go in and have that smile. Very, very humbling. But, the first time you make your first flight and there's no noise and you're just chilling and going along is, very cool. And the thing I loved about it was the fact that you could freestyle and wave ride with no waves. You can just cruise and carve, kind of like snowboarding on a ripple. That's where I really see how the future has it, because you always, you have a playground. You can choose your obstacles.
Yeah, and I find that we can space ourselves out, so it's a little bit less competitive for waves and that kind of thing. Out of all of them, freestyle, like, which is your favorite discipline that either you like to watch or take part in?
I'm a fan of the mix. One of the let's say formats we have with the GWA is that depending on the conditions at hand, it can be one way or the other. So we have the 100% pure wave events where it is only surfing, and then we have the 100% freestyle events. But then there's like a little annex that, if, for example, we're at a wave spot and conditions aren't great to do 100% wave, we mix it up. And in my opinion, that's where the sport really comes to life, because you portray what your average Joe has in front of his beach, which is he has some kickers to do some moves off. He has a small little ripple or a nice little wave to do some cruising and some carving. And I think it's more the reality of what people can relate to back home. Because all of us would love to drop in on Punta Preta or Mauritius or that, but it's not normally our home ground or on a super butterflat location. But I think I really fell in love with it when I saw the first event we did in Brazil. and Bowers Muller came all the way from the back, surfing this bump, surfed the wave, finished the wave, turned around, and went and did a backflip off of that wave he was surfing as a kicker and continued on. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a skate park out there. Of course, he makes it look easy. But
oh, yeah, balls is top quality for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Now, audience, obviously, for GWA and GK continue to grow. Now you're on site, you get to go to all the events. What kind of a demographic of people are showing up? Families, younger people, older people, people who are involved in wind sports, not involved in wind sports? What have you seen?
I think GWA, so especially on the wingfoiling, there's a big family vibe. So a lot of youngsters, obviously the demographic of the competitors is younger. You're looking from 22 to 14 years old. So a lot of them come with their parents, travel with their parents, and, uncles, etc., coming along. On the beach, you do see a bit of everything. But I would say that it's a younger generation with families. And that's, I think, is very cool to see. And then, like any event, depending on the location, you will get more or less people. The more remote locations, take a Cape Verde, for example, the beach is not going to be packed because it isn't next to a city. It isn't right there. But you go to the likes of a Silt or a Lucat or places that are a lot more accessible, you do see people turning up. And the cool thing is they ask about it. It's like, hey, whoa, what is this? What is happening here? And I think that's definitely one of the advantages wingfoiling has, is that it is so accessible. You can go out in a lake right next to a city and cruise and have a session, which you couldn't do on a kite because you couldn't launch, or it would be too gusty, or, it kind of reminds me of like the windsurfing in the 80s, where you could just pooter out into the middle of these lakes in Central Europe and have a session. And I think that's why it is getting so popular.
And obviously gear is lighter than windsurfing. You don't have to uphaul. The only thing we got to be a little bit careful of is the foil, but the kids seem to have such a good handle on that. Have you seen any crazy kind of wipeouts? Obviously you've seen everything. So any terrible injuries so far, or has it been fairly manageable?
Fortunately, touch wood, fairly manageable. Obviously, the occasional, in the end, where we're at, these guys and girls are pushing the limits, and sometimes the limits push back. Definitely with the foil waves, is the fact of being foot straps involved in waves is hard, because if they do get caught and go over the falls or something, unless they can release, you have a big foil, wrapping around your head. So that's always you have to be careful. But fortunately, nothing too major, because you can detach, which compared to, for example, kiting being hooked in, you can't let go and everything stops, even though depowers, etc., assistance safety is a lot better. I think winging is very user friendly. And as long as, you learn in a certified school, take the basics, get the basic knowledge, I think we have to be more careful about who is using it and that they have knowledge of the ocean, because, a lot of the times with these sports that are, let's say, learner friendly, that you can be having fun in, what would he say, a week or a couple of weeks of starting to be on the gear, you already have a smile on your face. Surfing, it takes you years and you never learn, or windsurfing. True. I think it's more etiquette and knowledge of the person using it, rights of way, riptides, currents, knowing how to swim. It's unbelievable how many people go out and do not know how to swim. I think that's more important. But yeah, fortunately, up until now, nothing major, just a few scratches.
That's positive. Now, mandated helmets, which I think is a good thing for everybody. Do you think there's any other safety considerations that are coming in that will come into play as people boost higher and higher and higher? Or I know, it's like double backflips and stuff and all that, you're starting to get into territory of some potential risk.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes and no. Using motorsports as an example, you see motorbike athletes, and yes, or snowboarders, they have protection, they have impact protection. But of course, when you're impacting on water, the second problem is if you go unconscious, you're not on dry land. So you have the addition of, being able to go under. I think it's a fine line with what the athletes are pushing. They're going higher and higher. And if you come down, that water is like concrete. It ain't a splash anymore. And we're starting to see that approach. But, the only real floatable or flotation device that is 100% certified is the old little foam square that has, I think it's those 100 newtons, which makes it official, if my memory serves me right. And you can't ride with that. But, I think we do need to find a line in between the typical impact vest, which is just to protect your ribs, and the full flotation, that, again, it comes from the bottom up. Is schools have to push it. It has to be accessible for brands. There's I wouldn't say a fashion point, but it has to, look the part as well. So people will actually wear it. But I think having a helmet all the time is already a huge advantage over other sports because it's a generic thing. It's very unusual to see a wingfoiler without a helmet. You look in kiting or windsurfing, it's very unusual to see someone with a helmet.
Very true. Yeah, like even I gave a lesson to my buddy's son here the other day. And so he didn't have helmet or impact, so I just gave him stuff and so I went out without one. And it felt unnatural given the fact that you'd been wearing one for so long. And I've had a few friends just get touched on the head with the foil and no helmet. So it's nice to see that. Now, as the GWA, do you guys stay on top of a lot of kind of these internal discussions about either these points and talk amongst yourselves and figure out what's the best? Because you almost have to, you're helping kids push themselves as far as they can go in their professional career. But on the other side, you almost have to parent as well a little bit, right? Because they are so much younger.
Oh, for sure. On and off the water.
Yeah.
In the end, it's especially, I think we have a responsibility with such a young generation being part of it from the A to the Z, from the beginning to the end. And I think it's very cool because the helmet is a mandatory thing, but it's a mandatory thing that has come naturally. It hasn't come because, we're going really high now, we need to use a helmet. No, it's been, you wear a helmet in wingfoiling, period. From anybody down the beach, it's become part of the gear setup, which I think really helps. And then, of course, anything from trying to get them to, know how to swim, do kind of classroom stuff about how to read riptides, just general water. And then especially there's so many water sports out there, water etiquette. I mean,
that's a big one, actually.
It's a huge one, especially, going into breaks around the world and let's say more on the wave side, you have to know what water etiquette is, because if not, you're going to create a bad rep for the sport. We've seen it, for example, with prone foiling and surfing and guys not respecting rights of way or who has preference on the wave, and there being places where you can't actually go in with a foil. And I think it's super important for let's say the ambassadors, which are the athletes that do the world tour, the local shop riders, or the people that have, let's say, a little bit of a name inside, that they are using as an example. And, hey, go to the locals, introduce yourself, ask them, be open. Hey, is this okay? Where do I do this? If you get a wave, go back out and wait a while. You have a wing, you have a foil, you can grab it from all the way up. Am I going to be just in the area where the surfers can only surf that part of the wave? I think we try and help them, progress in that way, and especially from a younger age, which of course has its challenges. Kids are kids and adults are adults, and some adults are kids. But we do try and create one of the guidelines of the GWA is to create that more complete rider. So an athlete who is amazing at surfing ends up being very good at freestyle as well, because if they want to be a world champion, they have to be the most complete athlete on the planet. It's not just about one side or the other. And, from that example also, being the industry being very involved with the GWA, the same as it is with the GKA, is, talk to them. Do young blood camps, F1 does the new generations, Duinatone, for example, does all of the young blood with the wingers, that from a very young age try and, tell them the mistakes that we've made as athletes coming from before, and try and guide them in a way. But you do also have to let them fly, because you can't just box them in, because you have the guys like Bausmuller, who is probably as out of the box as we can get since the beginning of all of his sports. You can't clip their wings, so to speak.
No, for sure. It's a gentle guiding. And I know when I was talking to Tom, the GWA does try to do as much interaction with the local community as possible. And because you guys are living some pretty cool, pretty cool lives from a lot of people look at it, the ability to travel and see all these different places. How's that community interaction and getting to know different cultures and people? How's that been?
I think it's one of the most important, and let's say one of the perks of the tour and of the job is we are seeing the world. It's again, being fortunate enough to passion involved, as traveling has always been a passion for myself, to be able to go to these different locations. But I think it's also important that, when we go to a location as an event, is that the local community is involved in the event. People from those countries who are, maybe wanting to become judges to be able to do their practices on a World Tour Championship stage. People, local businesses that are involved to give back to the community. I think it's very important not just to turn up to a place with everything done and this is our way or the highway. I think, we always try to have local sides involved, because give a man a fish, don't teach, try and get them to learn how to get that fish, because then it's just going to make it bigger and bigger.
Yeah, because it is their event. If you think about it, it's in their town, it's their break, and we're like guests there coming in and being allowed to use it. Yeah.
We're fortunate. We're fortunate. They are letting us do that, and that's where competition-wise wildcards should be mandatory. And wildcard doesn't have to be the best person out there. It can be their best ambassador. It can be whoever the event seems fit to represent them inside the competition format. The same way as like being involved in the crew. You should have local judges. You should have local, organizers involved inside, because they're going to have knowledge that we don't have, because it is their spot. It is their politicians. It is their country. They know it better than us. We can, dot the I's, cross the T's, but I think it's so important. And then, one of the best things about traveling is, getting to meet different cultures, different people around the world, just, opens your mind.
Yeah. And I think that helps blend with all this stuff going on in social media and kids spending more and more time on there, and more division being spelt around the world, because there's always differences among us. I can only see this benefiting, especially the youth coming in that get to go to these different spots, meet 7 different people that are all completely different, come back home and say, hey, like they're just like us.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look at Chris MacDonald, who lives out there in Hood River. He's Mr. Freestyle. The world champion, and probably the guy pushing the level the most. I know a couple of months ago, about 6 different athletes went and stayed at their house with him and his parents to enjoy and to get to know themselves and to train together and get to know the States, and became a whole family thing. And I think that's so cool. Yeah. And sometimes on the adult side, the older side, that doesn't happen so much anymore. And I think it's true. That is so cool that, it's almost like they went over and had a sleepover. It's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the older you get, the easier it is to box yourself in your house and never leave, right? And not talk to people and just do your own thing. But as kids, it's nice that they have that opportunity. Which would be your favorite tour stop if you can pick one?
Oof. Probably Tarifa, my hometown. I think a place that has a lot of history of different water sports. So the beaches are always crowded, and it has that mix format possibility. If I had to pick if I had to pick one of everything, because there you do see, let's say, more of a reality of what everybody would riding. I'd say Tarifa would definitely be my favorite place so far.
You got a lot of crazy athletes coming out of there, like Nia and Zavi and like Fabi over there from North who's from there. We just had him on the show like last week talking with him.
Yeah.
And it's just such a, like, it's on my list of places to go. I'm in Mexico this winter, but like it's definitely a place that I would love to go spend a winter or fall in or something. How was that kind of vibe and scene growing up so close in a Spanish town?
I think very, very fortunate because it is one of the wind meccas of the world. So especially in Europe, it's a place that is always windy. And there's a very big community of athletes and people and enthusiasts that roll through any time of the season. And yeah, it's really cool because you get to meet a lot of different cultures, especially from the European side. It's the south of Europe, so it's warmer for Europe. You have a lot of, some of the best riders in the world from windsurfing, kiting, wingfoiling, and whatever comes next have come out of Tarifa, and or they spend a lot of time throughout the season to come down there. I think it's definitely a good place to be involved in the scene. And then on the Spanish side, the food, the vibe, the kind of Latin thing that Spain has in the Mediterranean is good place to grow up.
Not bad. Riding time when you're on tour, do you, like, I know Tom doesn't get a lot of riding time when he's out. Do you get any, or is it kind of the same thing?
Kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
It is, you have to be careful because working with your passion, sometimes passion becomes work. So you have to know how to separate. I always try and maybe have more time before or after an event because when especially from my side, when I'm talking or shouting about something for 10 hours, when I'm done shouting about it, I just want to get out. I want to get out of there and talk about the newspaper. But definitely. Obviously, if there's good conditions, you're always going to want to get on the water. But the realistic side of events, it is, from dawn until dusk until dawn, and you don't get much time to get out there. A lot of people see it as, you guys are on holiday, you're in Brazil, loving it. And I'm like, sitting in front of a TV screen in Punta Preta with, perfect 12-foot barrels breaking in front of my screen and not being able to touch them is a lot harder than it seems.
I went over to Maui, I think it was in 2012 or 2013, and I volunteered there, and I did the live stream with a buddy of ours now for the PWA that year. Yeah, and it was 8 hours of competition, sit behind the screen, just like shooting and stuff like that, and making sure not to get jittery. Like 4 or 5 hours in, how do you keep, let's say, focus and enthusiasm? Because people might tune in like 3 hours in, and if you're like drowning out by that time and you're tired, it's like, screw this, I'm gonna go watch wrestling. But like, how do you keep that motivation and enthusiasm throughout your broadcast?
It isn't easy, that's for sure. Location, formats, people really make a difference. Not all of the time we have a second commentator, which really does make a difference. So trying to roll and get athletes or people coming in to be able to have a conversation, because talking to yourself for 10 hours is hard for anybody. The listener and the talker. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it's just a lot of times I think it's reminding ourselves that, hey, this isn't that bad. Yes, you are there, you are talking about it, but I think that passion does come in, and just having cards up your sleeve of having a bit of a plan, seeing what is going to come throughout the day, know when those lulls are, make sure to try and have things, kind of set out for when those scenarios happen to be able to keep it more dynamic, because it's a bit, one of the big talks generically across sports. I'm very involved in CrossFit as well as lives and MC, and it's so important that in the end you want to be able to take your grandma to the beach and for her to go wow in those first 3 minutes, is to go, whoa, what, I have no idea what this is, but that is incredible. And I think it's something that we have to be careful with in our sport, be it wingfoiling, is not to go too niche. Because if you make the niche of the niche of the niche, yeah, there's going to be 10 people that love it, but there's going to be thousands of people who don't understand it. And to be able to keep it entertaining, less is more, quality over quantity. And I think, the formats, which I know for next season is a big topic that is coming out, to see how to, maximize exposure, how to make it seem more interesting, how to seem more appealing for that mass market, not just the, die hardcore people that will watch it no matter what. I think it's super important to be able to keep it enthusiastic, but obviously, keeping our feet on the ground, that yes, it will be amazing to have a 20 crew live stream with all bells and whistles, but there has to be a reality of, if there's, I think, maximum we're having probably about, after a live stream of a day, maybe about 25 to 30,000 views, which is great for the sport that it is. About 1,500 to 2,000 people watching at once on the top events, but it also is very joined to A, the action that is happening, and B, the location and time zone.
All right.
For example, Cape Verde, it was 12-foot barreling, beautiful sunny waves, an hour and a half difference time zone from Europe. And it was happening when it was also, great for the US to be able to tune in as well. So that was like picture perfect, because even if you don't understand it, you see these athletes ripping in a wave and they're in board shorts and it's beautiful. Is going to be a lot more entertaining than, in a wetsuit with 10 degrees doing 3 spins on something that is completely flat. I think it's a topic that is out there, and for the industry as well, is where are the next steps? And that's why there's the committees, the GWA, they meet up with the industry twice a year, where they have a meeting with all of the brand members to, see where they are taking the sport, where it's going. And I think a thing that a lot of people don't understand sometimes, or don't want to see so far past that picture, is there's more than just the entertainment of what we want to see. For it to be sustainable, there has to be, where the brands are taking it, where the athletes want to take it, what is logistically possible with the organizers that are at hand, what are, price tags, what is needed to be able to make a sustainable tour, which I think, especially at the GKA and the GWA, we can be very happy with, is because, athletes can have a future and say, hey, I know there's going to be a world tour next season. Let's say the end of my kiting career, there were so many ups and downs with different world tours appearing, one disappearing, another one coming up. It was a very, let's say, dark time. I think it's very cool that the new generations can go, actually, hey, we're pretty sure we're going to get 5 to 6 events a season where we're going to be able to push and see us, and brands as well. And I think that's a very cool thing for them to be able to have.
Are you seeing a lot of kids now? I'm like, obviously follow the traditional kind of career path of going to school. And like, I'm finding a lot of these kids are engineers, actually. There's a lot of engineers in this kind of GWA space. Are you finding they're doing that, supplementing their income with obviously brand sponsorships? And because traveling to all these destinations isn't cheap. And you can't let's say you're just working a side end job. You can be a super passionate and dump all your savings into it. But then after your career's over, you're not getting a house. You're starting from like you're 16. So have you seen some of those transitions and stuff? And is industry working a little bit more with athletes to help them through that?
In winging, I'd probably say it's a little bit too early. Because
even
yes,
kiting,
we
then?
can. Kiting, yeah. I mean, for example, winging Bo, she is an industrial engineer, Bo and Van der Lingen, and she literally just finished her theory, I think 6 months ago. And she was doing stuff with Mystic, and Fabi, for example, who I had on, is seriously involved with North Winging as well. I think there are characters that are coming aside, but the thing with winging is that the top side of the athletes, they're 16 years old.
Yeah,
So
okay, all right,
they are not
even there yet.
not thinking. They're not thinking of, wow, I have to get to the end of the month and pay a mortgage.
True.
They're not, and they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be at that process, but then it is very important who surrounds them, be it their parents, be it brand managers, be it, agents. I think that is very important for those age. One of the things that we saw in kiting from, the days of, for example, Martin Vary, Jaime, Jeff Tobias, a lot of when the Space Monkeys crew started the kiting revolution, so to speak, these guys were 30 plus. So they knew how much it cost to live. It wasn't that they would go traveling and what said on their contract was what they could enjoy. And let's say as the newer generations came into kiting, there was a moment in the sport where you'd get a top 10 contender who would get 2 sets of kites from a brand, and that was it, because they either had money or they didn't have to pay for anything because they're still living with their parents. And that brought the salaries down to the bottom, because as a brand, it's like, hey, I got a top 10 contender. Why am I going to be paying you $50K a year if you're not even making top 20? I think we do have to be careful. But winging, especially winging with how the industry is at the moment, I know contracts are in a very, very good place. Athletes are being very looked after. And it's good to see, because no matter the age, this isn't football. If you want to be able to retire and be able to buy that house, be able to have a living inside the sport, I think, like anything, studying is primary. It has to be your main goal, because then, if you had Fabi on, he's a perfect example. He's an ambassador. He's a guy that is good on the water, great off the water. He speaks languages. He is studied and is involved in R&D. If he wants to, he can have a future inside the sport when he decides not to compete. And, in kiting, you take the likes of Raphael, Sky Skolback, Etienne Lodz, Dave Daroski. You take a lot of them that were ex-riders, but because they had value to a brand outside of, in between the buzzers with a 7 minutes, that's why they're still there and can still live with their passion.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. Valid point. Where do you see this whole thing going?
Oof, that's the $1 million question.
It is.
I think winging has a very bright future because of there are so many kids involved. And where there are kids come federations, where there are federations come grants, and where there are grants, you will come further along in outside industry support. I think the accessibility wing has is unlike any water sport we've ever seen. It's not heavy. Foils are, day after day are getting easier to put together and put down, that you can, whack it on, put it in the car, and then, fold it down into a car very easily. Equipment, you have so many different options on price point that, it's accessible to most people. I think it has, water sports wise, it has the brightest future, without a doubt. We just have to make sure that, everybody puts their little grain of sand to be able to look after it.
Is there anything else you want to cover?
Pretty much good from my side. Just invite as many people to give it a go. Competing is awesome, but we can't forget to have fun. And I think it's a lot. Everything from your local shop to your biggest of brands is. I think we have a responsibility in wingfoiling as the general consumer of let's say the world tours is so young. We have an even bigger responsibility to turn those kids into ambassadors, and not just one-hit wonders that will appear and disappear in the spite of 3 to 4 years. I think if we brands doing young blood camps, doing seminars, I think there's so many possibilities, and I really do think if we look after that, winging has the brightest future.
Oh yeah, it's either that or everybody else is getting older, so that's the thing, right? We need that young blood rolling through and to kind of ignite that new level of passion. And hey, thanks a lot, man, for taking the time to talk with us today.
You too.
Hope you have any wind or any sort of entertainment for the rest of your day.
No, I got back from Puerto Rico yesterday from a CrossFit event, and I'm off to Serbia tomorrow for another one. So I'm going to be inside, but then next week I go home to Tarifa, and it's looking like there's a good forecast. So loving to get in the water.
Beautiful. All right. Well, hey, safe travels, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining.